Target in the crosshairs. February 16, 1945. 21,000 feet above southern Germany. The sky is thin up here, so thin it feels like the world is running out of air. Frost creeps along the inside of the cockpit glass, tracing spiderweb lines over the view of a gray smudge of city far below. 4 Wright Cyclone engines hammer through the cold, each one a vibrating, straining heartbeat on the wings of a B-17G flying fortress called Carolina Sky. Captain Daniel Reeves keeps his hand steady on the yoke thumbs resting near the trim switch's eyes, flicking between the instruments and the drifting shape of the target city ahead. Oxygen mask tight over his face, goggles pressed into the bridge of his nose, he looks less like a man and more like some anonymous figure in a machine, until his eyes a tired gray-blue, narrow at the sight beneath the scattered cloud. Kronheim in sight. 10 o'clock low comes the clipped voice of his bombardier over the interphone. First Lieutenant Aaron Klein is lying prone in the very nose of the bomber chin, resting in the pad of the Norden bomb sight gloved hands, making tiny corrections as he steers the entire aircraft from his station. The plexiglass blister around him is flecked with frost, and the faint blossom of flak bursts far off to the east. Reeves glances left. Through the side window contrails from the rest of the formation lace, the sky in pale white lines, 3 squadrons of the 389th Bomb Group, silver B-17s glinting in the cold sun. Their assigned box is tight today. The group navigator came on the interphone 20 minutes ago to say they were dead on course. No excuses. No mistakes. Lead, this is Red 2. We copy target visual crackles. A voice in his headset, one of the wingmen tucked just off his right. Roger, Red 2. Stay tight. Flak's gonna be rough over this one, Reeves replies, voice level, almost casual. But inside his stomach is a hard knot. He knows Kronheim. Not personally, not like a hometown, but from photographs pinned to a cloth board back at the briefing hut in Norfolk. Black and white reconnaissance shots annotated in red grease pencil. Primary marshalling yard, Kronheim City Center. Expect heavy civilian presence in surrounding districts. No deviation from bomb run authorized. He remembers the briefing officer's pointer tapping the map. You will bomb the marshalling yards, gentlemen. These trains are feeding the Wehrmacht on the Western Front. Every boxcar we destroy is one less shell, one less rifle, one less tank facing our boys in the Ardennes. We're in the last act now, don't lose your nerve. They all laughed at that nervous, forced laughter rolling under the tobacco smoke in the hut. Don't lose your nerve. As if nerve was the only thing standing between them and the ground 10,000 feet below. In the cockpit now, with Kronheim's jagged streets slowly resolving into blocks and neighborhoods that line lands differently. Below the city isn't a target designation. It's a slow-rotating world, rows of tightly packed tenements, the spire of a church, punching through the rooftops, ribbons of tram lines, smoke from chimney stacks, rising in thin, peaceful threads. The marshalling yard is there too, a throat of black rails and sidings, boxcars like toy bricks lined up in rows, locomotives idling. But it is pressed right up against the old town like a fist jammed into a crowded chest. Reeves hears another sound in his headset, Chaplain O'Malley's voice from the morning, soft but insistent in the frosty pre-dawn outside the mess. They'll tell you the map is clean, Danny the chaplain had said, fingers cupped around a steaming mug of coffee. Lines and circles, primary, secondary, tertiary. But down there it's never clean. He'd shrugged it off then. It's the job, Father. It is, O'Malley had agreed, but a man still has to live with the way he does it. Bomb bay doors coming open, Klein calls now. There's a mechanical whine, a shudder that runs through the length of the fuselage as the huge doors beneath the aircraft begin to yaw apart. The slipstream claws at the open belly of the bomber. 8,000 pounds of high explosive 500-pound general-purpose bombs racked in twin rows are suddenly kissing the cold air of Europe. The crew can feel it. You could too if you were there, the tilt of the aircraft as drag changes the way everybody falls a little quieter over the interphone. In the radio room behind the bomb bay, Tech Sergeant Miguel Ortiz runs his thumb over the edge of a crumpled photograph of his kid sister in El Paso. In the top turret, Staff Sergeant Red Callahan scans the sky for fighters that may never come, eyes flicking between glints of sunlight that could be 109s or just ghosts. Flak at 3 o'clock. Black puffs begin blooming off the starboard wing, dark flowers unfolding against the pale sky. The bursts are distant at first, then closer, each one leaving a momentary dimple in the air. The shrapnel invisible but real enough to punch a hole through a man's chest or sever a control cable like string. The fortress shudders as a near miss slaps its underside. Hold formation. Reeves says more to himself than anyone else. Stay on the run. In the nose, Klein speaks with the calm of a man pretending the entire world depends on the angle of his wrist. Approaching initial point. Beginning bomb run. I have control. On a bombing run, the pilot surrenders the aircraft to the bombardier. The Norden bomb site is now flying Carolina sky, trimming her course for the precise line that will thread the bomber directly over the aiming point. Reeves can feel the subtle, unnatural corrections as Klein nudges them left, then right, then left again. IP now, the navigator calls. Wind from the northwest 5 knots. Copy. Kronheim spins slowly into perfect alignment. The marshalling yard swells in the glass, those black rails like veins, the city blocks hunched all around them. Through the hazy air, Reeves thinks he can see a tram crawling along a street. Tiny dots that might be people in a square near the church. He knows the secondary target too. It was barely mentioned in the briefing, a footnote at the edge of the map. Secondary rail bridge. South Kronheim River, ISAR sparse civilian presence. Lower strategic value. A 2-span steel girder bridge across a winding river on the city's southern edge, flanked not by tenements but by scrubland and a scattering of warehouses. Hit the bridge, you choke the same rail traffic, just less brutally. Norden's locked. I have the primary, Klein says. There's a hum in his voice, the professional satisfaction of a clean solution. 3 minutes to release. 3 minutes. For 3 minutes, Captain Reeves lives in 2 worlds at once. In one world, he is the obedient officer of the United States Army Air Forces, a captain in the 568th Squadron, executing a lawful order in a lawful war. His duty is clear hold. Course, keep formation, deliver the bombs on the designated marshalling yard. Do that, and when they land back in Norfolk, the mission will be tallied. The film from the bomb bay camera developed the crew chalk, another white bomb on the fuselage. In the other world, the one Chaplain O'Malley hinted at, he is a man staring down the throat of a city full of people who did not draw the map that labeled their homes collateral. He hears his mother's voice from North Carolina, reading him the Beatitudes in a little wooden church. He hears the murmur of the crew behind him, men who trust him to bring them home, but who also trust him to point this flying warehouse full of death. Lead, we're drifting left, of course, comes Red 2's voice, a hint of concern there. I see it, Reeves says. He doesn't correct. Not yet. Because beneath them, off to the right, just out of the Norden's crosshairs, the faint snake of the river is appearing through the haze. A glimmer of water, and then the dark bar of the secondary bridge. No clustered tenements, no church spire. Just tracks, steel, and open ground. 2 minutes, Klein says. Stay steady. Do not jink on the run, Captain. Reeves's right hand tightens on the yoke. His left hovers near the interphone switch to the bomb bay, to the formation, to everyone. If you were in that seat, you'd feel it, the weight of 8,000 pounds, and 8 other men, the knowledge that a half-inch of wrist movement could redraw the line between primary and secondary, between city center and a lonely bridge. Outside, flak walks its way closer, bursts now blooming level with the cockpit. One blossom so near that fragments rattle against the fuselage like thrown gravel. Someone curses in the waist. Someone else prays. 60 seconds, Klein says. On target. Don't move her, Danny. We're perfect. Danny, not Captain. Reeves swallows. His eyes slide left to the marshalling yard growing huge in the nose rails converging like a sight picture, then right to the faint line of river, the secondary bridge almost slipping out of view. The order is clear. The consequences of disobedience are not hypothetical. Every man in the 8th Air Force knows what happens to an officer who willfully violates mission orders. But the bombs are still on their racks. The city is still whole. And there are 10, maybe 15 heartbeats left in which he can decide what kind of man he is going to be when this war is over. His thumb brushes the trim. Just a touch. Just enough that if you were watching the formation from above, you'd see the lead ship nudge almost imperceptibly off the straight line toward the city's heart, beginning to drift degree by degree toward the river. In the nose, Klein's head jerks. Hey, what are you doing? Get me back on the yard. Reeves takes a long breath that tastes of rubber and cold metal. Bombardier, he says quietly, we're changing the run. Braking formation. The words hang in the cramped cockpit like a misfired round. For a heartbeat, nobody replies. Only the roar of the engines and the dull thump of distant flak fill the space between men. Then Klein's voice comes back sharp and disbelieving. Negative, Captain. We are locked on primary. I have the yard. We're inside a minute. What the hell are you doing? Reeves doesn't answer right away. He eases pressure on the yoke, edges the nose another sliver toward the river. The marshalling yard slides almost imperceptibly off-center in the nose glass. The bridge comes a hair closer to the crosshairs of the Norden. Outside, the formation reacts like a living thing. Lead, you're drifting. That's red 2. Again off the starboard wing. His voice tight. You're pulling us off the run. Correct back now. In the co-pilot seat, First Lieutenant Jack Harlow twists toward Reeves, goggles pushed up just enough that his eyes are visible, wide and incredulous. Danny, you heard him. We're off course. Bring her back. Reeves can feel Harlow's boot heel braced on the floor, ready to fight him if it comes to that. Bridge has less housing, Reeves says, forcing his voice to stay even. We can still hit the rails. We cut their trains without leveling half the city. That's not the order, Harlow snaps. You heard the briefing? No deviation from bomb run. They'll nail us to the wall if we... An explosion slams into the air above them, the fortress jerking like a punched chest. Shrapnel rattles across the wings. A warning light flickers on the engineer's panel. Hit on number 3, Cowling, but she's holding the flight engineer. Tech Sergeant Wallace reports. Oil pressure steady. We're good. Fortress lead. This is group leader. Tighten up your run, comes another voice. Colonel Pritchard from the lead ship of the high squadron somewhere above and behind them. Even over the static, you can hear the irritation. You're walking the box off target. Get back on the yard, Reeves. He could still do it. That's the cruel part. Even now, even with the secondary sliding closer into frame, all it would take is a firm twist, left one hard correction, and the Norden would swap the bridge for the yard again. The city center would swell back to dead center. The mission would be by the book, the after-action report clean. 30 seconds, Klein says. His voice has dropped quieter now. If you keep this course, the crosshairs are going to walk off the yard. Sir, this is disobedience of a direct order. Reeves stares through the windscreen. The river is clear now, a dull stripe of pewter cutting through the southern edge of Kronheim. The bridge is a blunt, dark bar across it, tracks running straight into the marshalling yard like an artery. Beyond it, only scrub a scattering of sheds, a few crooked farmhouses set well back. How many people live in your marshalling yard? Aaron Reeves asks, voice low enough that the others on the interphone might miss it. Klein doesn't answer. For a moment, all Reeves can hear is the faint mechanical hum of the Norden as the bombardier tries to drag the plane back on the primary target and realizes he can't. The pilot has taken control back by sheer will. The bomb sight can't override the man with his hands on the yoke anymore. In the waist, Callahan's voice barks out. Fighters 10 high, 3 specks slash across the sun, Messerschmitt BF-109s banking in. A second later, tracer rounds streak through the formation, bright sewing needles of light threading between the bombers. A B-17 2 boxes over, suddenly vomits fire from its inner wing. One engine coughs smoke, then flames. Stay on the run, Pritchard orders voice iron now. Do not break. Bombs away, then evasive. Hold steady, damn it. 15 seconds, Klein says. There's something desperate in it now. Danny, for God's sake, think about what you're doing. They'll court-martial you. They'll strip your bars. Danny, not Captain, again. Reeves tightens his grip and does something very small and very final. He adds one more degree of bank toward the bridge. The marshalling yard slides down and left out of the Norden's perfect mathematical cross. The bridge, black and hard and spare, settles in. Klein swears softly, the kind of word that's not about anger, but grief. Then you can almost hear the decision land behind his eyes. His job is to put bombs on what the pilot gives him. Fine, he says. Bridge locked, aim point acquired. 5, 4. In the radio room, Ortiz crosses himself so fast his glove blurs. In the ball turret, Staff Sergeant Lewis grips his twin 50s and feels the shudder of the open bomb bay above like a second heartbeat. In the tail, Sergeant Shorty Barnes watches the 109s turn for another pass, his world, a narrowing tunnel of sky and fear. 3, 2, 1, bombs away. The fortress heaves upward as 8,000 pounds of steel and TNT let go at once. If you were watching from the ground, you'd see it the neat, terrible string of dark shapes dropping free of Carolina Sky's belly, arcing downward in a silent, lazy line. A heartbeat later, the rest of the formation releases as well. Some ships still aimed at the yard, others thrown off by flak, a few wavering between. For a frozen instant, the bombs belonged to no one. Then, they belonged to gravity. Bombs gone, doors closing, Klein reports flat. Confirm hits, Reeves asks, though they all know it'll be minutes before the bomb bay camera film gives the truth. I saw the stick walk right across the near side of the bridge, Klein says reluctantly. We'll cut at least one span. Maybe both. Not a perfect stick, but good enough. Behind his goggles, his eyes flick once toward the city blocks they left untouched. Smoke will still rise there. Other groups are hitting their primaries. But Carolina Sky's bombs won't be the ones turning those tenements into open walls and dust. Right turn to heading 270, the navigator calls. Get us out of this hornet's nest. Reeves banks the fortress west, the formation wheeling with him. Fighters slash past again. Callahan and Lewis open up with their Brownings, the guns chattering through the airframe. A 109 streaks by, so close the pilot's scarf is a flash of white. Then it is gone, trailing smoke from a hit or just a trick of the eye. Lead, this is Red 2, comes the angry voice again. What the hell was that? Our bombs walked right across the edge of the yard. Intel's gonna say we botched the run. Keep your spacing and follow egress, Reeves replies. His voice is calm, but his pulse is hammering so hard he can feel it in his fingertips. We'll answer questions on the ground. Above, Colonel Pritchard comes back on the line, voice clipped enough to cut steel. Fortress lead, you and I will have a conversation at debrief, he says. You just bought yourself a stack of paperwork, Captain? Don't make it worse by losing any planes on the way home. Yes, sir, Reeves replies. He flicks the interphone selector to isolate the cockpit for a moment, cutting the crew out. Just him and Harlow now wrapped in engine noise and thin light. Harlow stares at him through the mask. You just threw your career into the river with that bridge, Danny, he says quietly. Reeves exhales, fogging the inside of his mask for a second. If that's all I threw, he says we got off cheap. Behind them, the city of Kronheim slowly falls away, the river gleaming like a blade, a smear of rising smoke beginning to coil over the shattered bridge. Somewhere in that wake, unseen and uncounted, are the lives that won't be pulled from rubble, because 8 bombs fell on steel instead of stone. The engines drone on, hauling the bomber and her crew back toward England, and toward a different kind of danger waiting on the ground. Not flak, not fighters. A table, a set of papers, and officers with hard eyes and cleaner uniforms than anyone who ever flew over Germany. The debriefing trap. The North Sea rolls beneath them like hammered lead, gray and indifferent. After the chaos over Kronheim, the flight home feels almost obscene in its calm. The engines thrum in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. No flak, no fighters. Just empty air, and the long, low line of the English coast slowly resolving ahead. Crossing the wash, the navigator says, home field in 10. On the interphone, the crew loosens a little. You can hear it in their voices. Ortiz, I swear I saw that 109 light up when I hit him. Callahan crows from the top turret. Yeah, and I saw Marilyn Monroe waving at me from that cloud bank. Lewis shoots back from the ball turret. You ain't the only one with dreams, Red. Laughter crackles down the wire, thin, brittle, but real. For them, the mission is already calcifying into a story they'll tell over watery coffee and cigarettes. Flak fighters the bridge, blooming into smoke behind them. The questions about which target they hit haven't reached the waist guns yet. In the cockpit, Harlow leans back, helmet resting against the cold aluminum of the headrest. You gonna loop the field to celebrate, Captain? He says lightly. Reeves doesn't answer. The coastline is drawing near patches of green, showing through veils of low cloud. Off to the left, another formation of fortresses limps home, one ship smoking another, nursing a feathered engine. Control crackles in his headset. Carolina Sky, this is Tower. You are cleared to land runway 17, wind 5 from the west. Welcome home. Copy, Tower 17. Reeves eases the big bomber down flaps, spreading like cautious wings gear thumping into place with a familiar clunk. The runway rises, widens, then kisses the tires with a squeal and a puff of smoke. The Fortress rumbles down the concrete, slows turns, and at last bares her belly to the cold English air as Reeves taxis toward the dispersal area. Only then, as he powers down the engines one by one, and the pounding roar begins to fade, do the other sounds creep in? Distant trucks shouted orders, the rumble of another ship landing, the faint ring of a bicycle bell. Somewhere on the perimeter track, he kills the last engine. Silence, thick, ringing, silence fills the cockpit. For a long moment, no one moves. Then Harlow unclips his harness and twists toward him fully. What you did up there, Harlow says quietly, they're gonna come after you for it, Danny. You know that. Reeves pulls off his oxygen mask. His face underneath is pale skin marked by the red grooves of the straps. He looks older than he did 3 hours ago. Yeah, he says simply, I know. The crew clambers out one by one, boots on the metal ladder, breath fogging the chilly afternoon air. Ground crew swarm the aircraft, checking for damage, shouting up at Wallace to log any hits. Barnes, you still got both legs, someone hollers from the hard stand. Last I checked, Barnes calls back, grinning weakly. Tell the medics I want an extra blanket anyway. An operations jeep pulls up before Reeves's boots even hit the tarmac. Colonel Pritchard is in the passenger seat. Cap pulled low, greatcoat collar turned up against the wind. His face is a careful mask, calm, controlled, and utterly devoid of the loose relief most men wear when a mission comes back mostly intact. Captain Reeves Pritchard calls, voice clipped. With me? Now? The other crews trudging toward the crew bus go a little quieter, eyes cutting sideways. Everybody knows that tone. It's the sound of trouble walking on two legs. Reeves hops down from the last rung, straightens his jacket, and falls in beside the colonel. The jeep lurches into motion, bouncing over the uneven concrete toward group headquarters. Inside Pritchard's office, the air smells of cold paper and stale coffee. Maps of Germany line the walls, dotted with red and blue pins. A potbelly stove ticks in the corner. On the desk, a mission board lies open, today's target circled in thick blue pencil, Kronheim, marshalling yard. The group intelligence officer, Major Leonard, is already there, sleeves, rolled up, a stack of aerial reconnaissance photos spread out before him. A camera sergeant hovers by the door, with 2 canisters of freshly developed bomb strike film metal, still slick from the dark room. Pritchard doesn't offer Reeves a seat. Captain, he says, walk me through your bomb run. Reeves stands at parade rest, hands locked behind his back. He can feel the dried sweat on his undershirt starting to chill. We approach the initial point as briefed. He begins. Bombardier took control. At approximately 1 minute to release, I determined that the primary target's proximity to densely inhabited residential districts posed an unacceptable risk of civilian casualties. I elected to shift the run to the secondary target, the Isar rail bridge, while still fulfilling the mission objective of disrupting enemy rail traffic. Leonard's head snaps up like a dog hearing a foreign word. You determined, he repeats. On what authority, Captain? Reeves meets his gaze. On my authority as aircraft commander responsible for the conduct of my crew and the ordnance under my control. The room goes very still. The only sound is the faint tick of the stove expanding and contracting with the heat. Pritchard steps around the desk boots, sounding sharp on the floor. He stops just inside Reeves's personal space eyes level with his. You were given a direct order at briefing, the colonel says softly. No deviation from the marshalling yard. That instruction came from 8th Air Force reinforced at group. Are you telling me plainly that you willfully disobeyed it? There it is, the line drawn in the air between them. You can almost see it. Reeves could dodge. He could talk about flak drift winds aloft Norden malfunctions. Plenty of crews have hidden misgivings behind the convenient fog of weather before, but that would make what he did small, accidental. And it wasn't. Yes, sir, he says. The words are solid, heavier than any bomb he dropped. I made a deliberate decision to drop on the secondary. Leonard exhales a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Christ, he admits it. Pritchard's jaw flexes once, a small motion near his temple. Major, he says without looking away from Reeves, run the film. The camera sergeant steps forward, nervously loading the canister into the compact projector set up on a side table. The lights click off. On the far wall, the ghostly black and white frames bloom to life, the checkerboard wings of Carolina Sky's squadron, then the ground rushing up rails, blocks, smudged squares of city. Frame by frame, they watch the bomb doors gape. The stick of bombs begin to fall. A white grease pencil dot marks where the Norden said the yard should be. The bombs walk in a neat line, but the line curtails early, straddling the approach to the bridge, blossoms of smoke knitting around steel and embankment instead of the dense black knot of the yards. Leonard grunts. No question, he says. He went for the bridge. The lights blink back on. Reeves blinks with them, eyes adjusting. Pritchard studies him for a long moment. When he speaks, his voice is calmer than before, but that calm has the rigid, brittle quality of ice over deep water. Captain Reeves, you are hereby relieved of flying duties pending investigation, he says. You will remain confined to quarters, unless ordered otherwise. You will write a complete statement of today's events within the next 2 hours. Do you understand? Yes, sir. You will also surrender your sidearm to the adjutant on your way out. That stings more than he expects. The .45 on his hip has gone up on every mission with him, a talisman as much as a weapon. He unclips the holster, lays the pistol on the edge of the desk. It leaves a small, cold-looking rectangle on the worn wood. As he turns to go, the door opens, and someone almost collides with him. Chaplain O'Malley, cheeks, reddened by the wind service cap tucked under one arm, stops short. His eyes flick from Reeves's face to the pistol on the desk to Pritchard behind it. Colonel, he says slowly. Captain. Pritchard's tone is neutral. Father. We're in the middle of a disciplinary matter. O'Malley's gaze lingers on Reeves. For a brief second, you might think he can read the whole mission in the man's eyes. I see, the chaplain says quietly. If the captain needs a place to write that statement, my office is warm. Pritchard considers, then gives a curt nod. Fine. But I want that statement on my desk by 1600, Father. No sermons in the margins. Yes, sir, O'Malley says. In the corridor outside, the chaplain falls into step beside Reeves. The hallway smells of wet wool and floor polish. The windows fogged with the breath of men coming in from the cold. O'Malley waits until they're halfway down before speaking. They're saying you came off the run, he murmurs. That you walked your bombs onto the bridge. Reeves doesn't slow. That's about the size of it. And you did it on purpose. Yes? O'Malley is quiet for a moment. Then, well, he says, if they're going to hang you for it, Danny, you might as well make sure the rope is holding the right man. He pushes open the door to his small office crucifix on the wall, a tin of instant coffee on the shelf, a battered wooden desk with paper and pen laid out. Sit, the chaplain says gently. Write down exactly why you did what you did. Reeves steps inside, the weight of the coming storm settling on his shoulders like a second coat. But the chair is solid, the pen surprisingly heavy in his fingers, the blank page in front of him, as unforgiving as any target map. He writes the date at the top. Then slowly he begins. Charges in black and white, 16th of February, 1945. Mission number 143 to target city of Kronheim, Germany. The pen scrapes softly over the paper, the sound strangely loud in the quiet of the chaplain's office. Outside, footsteps pass in the corridor, a door bangs somewhere down the hall, a typewriter clacks like distant machine gun fire. Reeves writes in the flat, precise language the Army likes. Altitudes, headings, IP coordinates. He notes the time over target, the reported wind, the flak intensity. It would be easy to leave it at that, to bury his decision in the small print of weather and error. But the page feels heavier than that. O'Malley's words echo, if they're going to hang you for it, you might as well make sure the rope is holding the right man. So after the facts, he adds something the forms don't really have a blank for. At approximately 1 minute to release, I determined that completing the bomb run on the primary target, which is adjacent to heavily populated residential structures, would result in excessive non-combatant casualties inconsistent with my understanding of lawful conduct in war. He pauses, staring at the phrase, my understanding of lawful conduct in war. His training at Maxwell Field didn't cover this. They gave him checklists for engine fires, loss of hydraulic pressure, instrument failure. There was no emergency procedure card for conscience. He keeps writing. I therefore chose to shift bombing to the designated secondary target, Izar Rail Bridge, which would effectively impede enemy rail movement while minimizing civilian loss of life, to the extent practicable under combat conditions. The words are awkward, legalistic, but they are true. When he's done, pages fanned out across the desk, his hand aches. Ink has smudged along the edge of his glove. He flexes his fingers and lays the pen down. O'Malley, who has kept mostly silent, watching from the corner with a small Bible closed in his lap, leans forward. You want me to read it? The chaplain asks. Reeves hesitates, then slides the top sheet across. O'Malley reads quickly, lips moving fractionally. When he reaches the middle, his eyes slow. At the last paragraph, they stop altogether. You know they won't like this line, he says, softly tapping a finger against excessive non-combatant casualties. I figured they wouldn't like any of it, Reeves replies. O'Malley studies him for a moment. Then he nods once. Good, the chaplain says. Then at least they'll be angry at the right thing. There's a knock at the door. The adjutant, a thin lieutenant with dark circles under his eyes, stands there with a folded set of orders in one hand. Captain Reeves, he says, Colonel's waiting on that statement. Reeves gathers the pages, straightens them, and hands them over. The lieutenant tucks them under his arm as if they might burn through his sleeve. Also, sir, the adjutant adds you're to report to the legal office at 0900 tomorrow. They're, assigning you counsel. Just like that, the thing that's been rumbling at the edge of his mind gets a name. Not just an investigation. Counsel. A trial. Understood, Reeves says. Word travels across the base faster than any jeep. By evening, in the smoky warmth of the enlisted men's club, someone is already telling the story as if it happened 3 wars ago. I'm telling you, he walked the whole damn stick onto the bridge, Callahan insists, jabbing a cigarette for emphasis. We were lined up neat as you please, then bump we're off and the bombs go dancing along the river. Why, Ortiz asks, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. We hit rails either way? No. Yeah, but intel's saying group screwed the yard, another gunner from Red 2 chimes in. Word is, Colonel's fit to chew steel. Lewis shakes his head slowly. Captain knew what he was doing, he says. You see those houses packed in around those tracks? That yard, it was glued to the city's ribs. Barnes, nursing a sprained ankle, leans in. You saying you wanted to drop on the bridge? I'm saying... Lewis hesitates. I'm saying I sleep better thinking about steel and water getting blown up than grannies and kids. Someone snorts. Steel, don't shoot back, Callahan mutters. We're not out there to feel good, boys. We're out there to win. At a nearby table, another crewman lowers his voice conspiratorially. Word is they'll court-martial him, make an example. What for, Ortiz asks. Disobeying a lawful order in combat. Hell of a charge that. They could throw him in Leavenworth if they want. The conversation eddy swirls, moves on. But a current has been set under the surface of the base, half admiring, half fearful. Reeves's name is in it now like a stone dropped in fast water. Ma! The next morning, the legal office feels nothing like combat. It feels worse in a way. No roar of engines, no smell of oil and cordite. Just the dry, papery scent of files and carbon copies, the murmur of typewriters, the staccato of a clerk's adding machine. On the wall, a framed poster urges, "Know your rights as an airman," in cheerful block letters. A captain in JAG Corps green tabs meets him in a cramped inner office. She's young, early 30s maybe, with dark hair pinned in a bun and wire-rimmed spectacles that make her look sterner than she probably is. "Captain Daniel Reeves," she says, standing to shake his hand. "I'm Captain Eleanor Hart, Judge Advocate General's Corps. I've been assigned as your defense counsel." Her grip is firm. Her eyes behind the lenses are sharp and appraising. "Ma'am," Reeves says, "I didn't expect." "A woman," she finishes dryly. "The Luftwaffe didn't either, but here we are." She motions to the chair opposite her desk. He sits knees brushing a metal wastebasket. On the desk between them lies a thin folder with his name typed neatly on the tab. "I got the preliminary charges about an hour ago," Hart says, opening the folder. They're moving fast, which means someone up the chain is worried about appearances. She slides a single sheet across to him. At the top, under the formal letterhead, the words are blunt. Specification 1. That Captain Daniel J. Reeves, 0728441, United States Army Air Forces, did on or about 16th of February 1945 while engaged in aerial combat operations, willfully disobey a lawful command from his superior officers by materially deviating from the designated bomb run on the primary target in violation of the 64th Article of War. Below that, more lines. Failure to obey order. Conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. If they want to, they can stack this pretty high, Hart says. Technically, willful disobedience in combat can carry very stiff penalties. She doesn't quite say the word, but it hangs there anyway. Death. Reeves looks up. "I'm not denying what I did," he says. "I signed a statement." "I read it," Hart replies. "You write like a man who has read too many field manuals and just enough theology to be dangerous." He almost smiles at that. Almost. "Captain, my job is not to argue that you didn't do it," she continues. "My job is to argue why it was not criminal that you did. They're going to say you endangered the mission, undermined discipline, set a bad example. We're going to have to show that you still accomplished the objective, and that your decision was within some reasonable interpretation of your duty." "Is there such an interpretation?" Hart leans back, studying him. "You shot up what they themselves briefed as a secondary legitimate target," she says. "You didn't turn around and go home. You didn't jettison in the sea. You hit German rail infrastructure that the war planners said counts. That's something." She taps the folder. "What I need from you is every detail," she adds. "What you saw, what you were thinking, who you talked to before the mission. Anyone who can testify about your record, your judgment, your conscience, frankly." He thinks of O'Malley, of Harlow, of Lewis's quiet voice in the waist. He also thinks of Pritchard's cold eyes, of Leonard's disbelieving laugh. "You really think they'll listen?" he asks. Hart's mouth quirks, not quite a smile. "In my experience, they'll listen to whatever helps them sleep at night once this is all over," she says. "Our job is to make sure your story is loud enough that they can't pretend it never happened." Outside, through the small warped glass window, a B-17 lifts off nose-rising wheels tucking in. Another mission heading for another city. On another morning. Inside this little office, at a dented metal desk, a different kind of war is about to begin, fought with statements and cross-examinations instead of flak and steel, but no less capable of killing a man's future. Hart closes the folder with a crisp snap. "Board of Officers will be convened in a week," she says. "Between now and then, Captain, we build your case. And you prepare yourself to walk into a room where everyone is going to ask why you refused to bomb a city. And you're going to have to look them in the eye when you answer." She holds his gaze for a long moment. "Can you do that?" she asks. Reeves thinks of the bridge, the river, the untouched ring of houses around the yard. Of the bombs stepping across steel instead of stone. "Yes, ma'am," he says quietly. "I can." A different kind of firing line. A week passes in a strange half-life. Carolina Sky flies another 3 missions. Reeves does not. He watches her go from the ground hands in the pockets of a borrowed overcoat, the engine's rising roar tugging at something in his chest. Harlow sits in his seat, now a different name on the flight board chalked in beside the familiar aircraft number. In the evenings, while other crews drift to the mess, or the club, Reeves sits in Hart's cramped office. The table between them fills with maps, mission reports, and dog-eared copies of regulations. Look at your record. Hart says one night, tapping a service file thicker than it has any right to be for a man his age. 32 combat sorties. Commendation for coolness under fire. You ditched in the channel, once lost an engine twice, brought home 2 crippled ships. This isn't some green kid panicking over his first flak burst. So they'll say I knew exactly what I was doing, Reeves replies. And we'll say that's precisely why it matters, Hart counters. They trusted you with that much steel and that many lives. It means your judgment isn't nothing. They bring in witnesses. Chaplain O'Malley, coat damp from the dregs of a February rain, perches on the edge of the spare chair hat in his lap. You remember our conversation before the mission, Hart asks him. I do, he says. I told the captain that maps make the world look clean. Target sectors all very tidy. But people don't live in tidy squares. I told him a man has to live with how he fights, not just whether he fights. Did you ever tell him to disobey an order? O'Malley smiles without humor. Ma'am, I've spent my whole career trying to get soldiers to stop thinking God is telling them to outvote their officers, he says. No, I told him to think. He did. Lewis, still smelling faintly of gun oil and sweat, sits stiffly in his dress uniform. He keeps fidgeting with the crease on his trousers. Tell me what you saw over Cronheim, Hart says. The yard was jammed up against the houses, ma'am, he says. I mean, right up against them. Like they built the city first and stapled the rails on later. And the bridge? Away from the town, he gestures vaguely as if the river is running across the office floor. Tracks on both sides, bushes, some sheds. Not no one, I'm sure, but fewer, you know. When we swung right, I remember thinking, well, that's still Germany getting blown up, but maybe less. Did the captain seem confused? Panicked? Lewis's jaw tightens. No, ma'am, he says. He sounded like he does when we get an engine out. Tight, but decided. Like he picked a thing, and that was that. Hart takes notes underlining certain phrases. Fewer. Decided. Still Germany. She is building something brick by brick, not an excuse, but a frame. Then the day comes when none of that preparation is theoretical anymore. Max, the courtroom is just a converted briefing room in group headquarters, but they've dressed it up like a theater. The mission maps have been taken down. In their place, a big flag hangs behind a long table where 3 officers sit, a full colonel in the center, flanked by a lieutenant colonel and a major. The articles of war, printed and framed, are propped near the wall. A single bare bulb buzzes overhead, throwing hard light and hard shadows. Rows of folding chairs line the back of the room. They're full. Pilots, navigators, ground crew clerks, word has gotten out, and nobody wants to miss the show where a man is put on trial, not for running away from combat, but for how he carried it out. Reeves sits at a smaller table to the right, Hart beside him. Both wear dress uniforms, freshly pressed ribbons in neat rows. His hands rest interlaced on the table. To an outside eye, he might look calm. Inside his heart is pounding a steady, insistent tattoo against his ribs. Across from them at another table sits the trial counsel, Major Leonard, the intelligence officer, now in the role of prosecutor. His file on the table is satisfyingly thick. He looks like a man who believes in clean lines on maps. The presiding officer, Colonel Harriman, clears his throat. This court is now in session, he announces. We are convened to consider charges against Captain Daniel J. Reeves, United States Army Air Forces, as specified under the 64th and 96th Articles of War. The charges are read aloud. The words are the same ones Reeves has seen on paper, but hearing them spoken makes them land differently. He did willfully and knowingly disobey a lawful command. Did prejudice good order and military discipline. Did in so doing set an example dangerous to the effective prosecution of the war. When they ask for his plea, he rises. His knees don't shake, but only because he refuses to let them. Captain Reeves Harriman says, How do you plead to specification 1? Not guilty, Reeves says. His voice is steady. And to specification 2? Not guilty, he sits. The words hang in the air like contrails slowly dissipating into the heavy room. Leonard rises first. He buttons his jacket with a small ritual tug, then begins in a tone that's almost conversational. Gentlemen, he says, addressing the board, this is not a case about cowardice. Captain Reeves did not turn his plane from the enemy. He did not flinch in the face of flak or fighters. He has by all accounts been a capable officer and pilot. He lets that hang for half a second before driving the next nail. But war, especially this war, cannot be fought on the basis of individual conscience. If every pilot decided from 20,000 feet what orders he felt like obeying, our entire air campaign would collapse into chaos. Targets are chosen after careful analysis by higher command. No deviation from bomb run is not a suggestion. It is a necessity. He paces slowly before the board. On February 16th, Captain Reeves chose to substitute his personal judgment for that of his superiors. In doing so, he materially deviated from the assigned target, disrupted the formation, and risked both mission success and the lives of other crews who depended on a steady lead. This is not heroism. It is hubris. And in war, hubris kills. He sits satisfied. Hart stands next. For a moment, she does nothing, just rests her fingertips lightly on the table, as if feeling the grain of the wood. No one here disputes the gravity of disobeying an order. She begins. If my client had turned his aircraft for home, jettisoned his bombs in the channel, or refused to fly at all, we would not be here arguing. She glances toward the window where distant engine noise filters faintly through the glass. But that's not what happened. On February 16th, Captain Reeves flew his aircraft into heavy flak and fighter opposition. He opened his bomb bay over enemy territory, and he dropped his bombs on a designated enemy rail target that this very command had briefed as legitimate. She lets that sink in. The question before you is not whether he completed the mission he did. The question is whether his decision in the space of a few heartbeats to shift from one valid target to another constitutes a crime worthy of destroying a man's career, or whether under the circumstances he faced it was a reasonable exercise of the discretion we entrust to every aircraft commander. Her gaze sweeps the room, briefly catching the eyes of a few pilots in the back row. You gentlemen know what 20,000 feet over Germany looks like, she says softly. You know what it feels like to see a city under your wings, and to trust that the colored circles on a map back here have been drawn with enough care that you can live with what you do up there. On that day, something broke in that trust for Captain Reeves. And rather than abort, rather than flee, he aimed at steel instead of stone. Hart sits. For a moment, the room is quiet except for the hum of the overhead light. Then the court calls its first witness. Prosecution calls Colonel James Pritchard. Leonard says. Pritchard takes the stand in full service, dress ribbons heavy on his chest. He looks tired, the way men in command always look tired, but there is an edge of controlled anger in his eyes. Under Leonard's questioning, his words are crisp, controlled, lethal. Yes, I gave the order of no deviation. Yes, it came from higher command. Yes, deviation endangers formation discipline. When Hart cross-examines, she goes at a different angle. Colonel, was the ISAR rail bridge a designated secondary target for this mission? Yes. And hitting it would, in your professional judgment, degrade enemy rail capacity in the sector? Yes. Did Captain Reeves's bomb film show his bombs striking that bridge? Yes. Pritchard's jaw ticks. But not the primary yard. Thank you, Colonel. No further questions. As Pritchard steps down, the shape of the battle lines in this room becomes clear. On one side, order obedience, the clean straight line from briefing map to burst pattern. On the other, a messy human question about what a man owes to his conscience when the map and the earth don't quite match. Reeves sits between those lines, back straight, hands folded, listening as they argue in the third person about the 15 seconds that might yet define the rest of his life. Conscience on the stand. Defense calls Staff Sergeant William Lewis. Hart says. Lewis looks uncomfortable in the witness chair, like a man who would much rather be hanging in a ball turret 10 feet below a speeding airplane than sitting above the polished floor under so many eyes. His dress jacket pulls a little tight across his shoulders. State your name and duty for the record, Hart prompts. Staff Sergeant William H. Lewis, ma'am. Ball turret gunner, Carolina Sky. Sergeant, you flew on mission 143 to Kronheim. Yes, ma'am. Tell the board what you saw on the bomb run. Lewis glances briefly at Reeves, then fixes his eyes on a point just past the colonel's shoulder, as if he's looking out a gun sight. We came in over the IP like always, he says. I could see the yard through my turret glass. It was close to the town. Houses pressed right up against the tracks. I remember thinking how if we missed by a little, we'd hit a lot of roofs. Did you see the secondary target? Yes, ma'am. The river and the bridge. Looked more alone? He hesitates, searching for a word. Less people, more dirt. And when the captain adjusted course, felt it in the turret, Lewis says. A little drift to the right. Enough that the bridge walked into the middle of my view. Did he announce what he was doing? Yes, ma'am, he said we were changing the run. Didn't sound scared, just firm. Hart nods. Did you believe at that moment that dropping on the bridge still meant you were doing your job? Yes, ma'am, Lewis says without hesitation. We're there to bust up trains. Rails on a bridge or rails in a yard, I don't reckon the Germans care which is bent. But I sure cared about who's under those rails. A faint murmur stirs in the back of the room. Hart raises her hand. No further questions. Leonard stands, walks closer, file in hand. Sergeant, he says, voice smooth, you're a gunner. Not a bombardier, not a pilot, correct? Yes, sir. And from your position hanging under the belly of the aircraft, you're looking through a narrow field of glass. You're under flak, under stress. Would you say your ability to assess the exact density of civilian housing in a German city is limited? Lewis swallows. Yes, sir, I guess so. And yet you are testifying about fewer people and more dirt, as though you had taken a census from 20,000 feet. I just know what I saw, sir. Leonard presses. You also know that if your captain is convicted, your testimony could affect his sentence. You like Captain Reeves? Yes, sir. You credit him with bringing you home from other missions. Yes, sir. So you have a personal interest in seeing him spared, Leonard finishes, which might color your judgment about what you think you saw. Lewis's hands grip the edge of the chair. Sir, I ain't a lawyer, he says stiffly. I just know that when we hit that bridge, I didn't see roofs popping apart. I saw water and steel, that's all. Leonard tilts his head as if considering, then gives a small shrug. No further questions. Lewis steps down, shoulders tight, jaw set. Reeves catches his eye for a moment as he passes a fleeting, wordless exchange. Defense calls Chaplain Michael O'Malley. Hart says next. The chaplain moves with an odd mix of humility and stubbornness, like a man used to being both welcomed and resented in equal measure. He places his hand on the Bible for the oath, but when asked to swear, he allows himself a small, wry smile. I'm on record as already believing in higher authorities, gentlemen, he says. But yes, I swear to tell the truth. A few chuckles leak from the back rows before Harriman's glare stills them. Chaplain Hart begins, Did you speak with Captain Reeves before Mission 143? I did, O'Malley says. Out by the mess. It was still dark. We talked about how clean maps look and how dirty war really is. Did you advise him to ignore orders? No, O'Malley says firmly. I advised him that whatever orders he carried out, he'd have to live with his own soul when the shooting stopped. Hart nods. After the mission, did you read his written statement? I did. And did it appear in your view to be a good faith account of his reasoning? Yes, O'Malley says, painfully so. Leonard rises slowly for cross. There is a faint, wary respect in his eyes. Nobody enjoys tangling with a chaplain in front of an audience. Father, he begins cautiously, you're not an expert in aerial tactics, are you? I am not, O'Malley agrees, though I've logged more hours in the air listening to men pray than I care to count. Leonard presses on. You understand that if every airman weighed each order against his personal conscience at the moment of execution, the result could be paralysis, confusion, friendly losses. I understand that war demands obedience, O'Malley says. But I also understand that after this war there will be tribunals where men are told they should have known when to say no to orders that were plainly unlawful. The room goes very still. Everyone knows about the rumors about post-war trials about accountability that doesn't stop with the private who pulled the trigger. With respect, Major, the chaplain continues quietly. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot tell our boys they must never question a target from the air, and then be shocked when some future court asks why no one ever did. Leonard's mouth tightens. Are you suggesting, Chaplain, that the order to bomb the Kronheim marshalling yard was unlawful? No, O'Malley says. I'm suggesting that in that moment, with that view, Captain Reeves believed a lawful alternative existed that would serve the mission with less harm to innocents. And he will answer to God for that belief, whether you convict him or not. Harriman clears his throat, cutting in before the air can get any thicker. Thank you, Father. That will be all. When O'Malley steps down, a strange heaviness settles in the room. The trial is no longer just about rails and targets. It's about what exactly these men will be remembered for when the uniforms are in mothballs. Defense calls Captain Jack Harlow. Hart announces. Harlow takes the stand in a uniform that looks like it was pressed 5 minutes ago by a man who didn't stop moving the whole time. He sits with a pilot's straight-backed wariness hat on his knees, eyes flicking once to Reeves before fixing on Harriman. Captain Harlow. Hart says you were co-pilot on Carolina Sky on the mission in question. Yes, ma'am. Did you disagree with Captain Reeves's decision at the time? Yes, Harlow says. I told him they'd nail him to the wall for it. So you did not encourage or support the deviation? No, I argued against it. Did he hesitate? Harlow takes a breath, remembering the feel of the yoke shaking under his hands, the sting of the oxygen mask, the pressure of time. He thought about it, Harlow says slowly. You can hear it in a man's breathing up there. But once he turned, that was it. He chose, and he stuck. Did you believe in that moment that he was acting out of fear? Harlow's answer comes faster this time. No, ma'am, he says. If he was scared of anything, it wasn't flak. What then? Harlow's gaze slides just for a heartbeat to the faces in the back row, to the pilots whose missions tomorrow might look like Kronheim, and whose memories will be haunted by whatever this board decides today. Of what it would mean, he says, to flatten half a city block, when there was a way to still hurt the enemy without doing that. Leonard stands for his cross-pouncing. So you admit, Captain, that your aircraft commander knowingly chose to ignore a direct order? Yes, sir, Harlow says. He knew. And yet you did not seize control of the aircraft. You did not report him in the air. Why? Harlow looks down at his hands, then back up. Because, sir, he says quietly, he was still flying into flak with his bomb bay, open for the United States Army Air Forces. He wasn't running. He wasn't quitting. He was choosing. And out there, men die when the cockpit starts fighting itself. In the front row, Hart's pen pauses over her pad. She doesn't underline this time. She just lets the words hang there. He wasn't running. He wasn't quitting. He was choosing. By the time the last witness steps down, afternoon has paled into a thin gray light at the windows. The stove in the corner ticks faintly. The board calls a recess. As chairs scrape and men stand to stretch, Reeves remains seated, staring at the grain of the table. Outside somewhere, a B-24 engines up its deeper roar, different from the fortress, but still part of the same war. Hart leans in, voice low. They've heard everything we can give them, she says. Next, they'll hear from you. He nods once. His mouth is dry, his throat tight. You ready to stand up there and tell them why you turned? She asks. Reeves thinks of the bridge, the church spire, the children he never saw but could imagine too easily. He thinks of the maps, the pins, the clean circles that never quite fit the messy world underneath. Yes, he says, I'm ready. 15 seconds. When they file back in, the room feels smaller. The air is thicker, as if the words spoken already have used up more oxygen than the ventilation can replace. Men settle back into their chairs, boots, scuffing wood, low murmurs dying out as Harriman raps the table once with a knuckle. This court will reconvene, he says. Defense may call its next witness. Hart rises. Defense calls Captain Daniel J. Reeves. Every eye in the room tracks him as he stands. It's a shorter walk than from the cockpit to the bomb bay, but it feels longer. No flak, no fighters, just the creak of his own boots, and the dull thud of his pulse in his ears. He takes the witness chair. The wood is hard under him, the back too straight. He places his hand on the Bible, repeats the oath in a voice that sounds distant to his own ears. When he sits, he folds his hands in his lap, then deliberately unclenches them. Hart stands a step away, not too close, not too far. "Captain," she says, "state your name and duty for the record." "Captain Daniel James Reeves," he replies. "Aircraft Commander B-17G Carolina Sky, 568th Bomb Squadron, 389th Bomb Group. You flew as lead ship on Mission 143 to Kronheim." "Yes, ma'am." Hart nods, then steps aside just enough that when he looks at her, he also has to look past her to the board, to the rows of faces beyond. "Captain," she says, "we've heard numbers, altitudes, headings, times. I'd like you to tell this board in your own words what you saw on that bomb run." He takes a breath. The room fades a little at the edges. He is back in the cockpit frost, on the glass engines hammering through thin, viciously cold air. "We came in over the IP at 21,000 feet, he begins. Visibility was good. I could see the city clearly through the forward glass. The marshalling yard was where the photographs said it would be, just south of the city center. Rails, sidings, boxcars." He swallows. His throat is suddenly very dry. "What I hadn't appreciated from the briefing photos," he continues, "was how close the housing came to the yard. Rows of tenements, narrow streets, a church spire sitting practically on the edge of the tracks." He glances briefly at Harriman. "From the air, sir, it looked like someone had laid rails right into the city's lungs." A pencil scratches faintly as one of the board members makes a note. And the secondary Hart prompts, "The ISAR rail bridge," Reeves says. "It crossed the river on the southern outskirts, tracks on bare embankments. A few structures, warehouses, maybe farm buildings, but they were set back from the span itself. It was open." "Describe what you were feeling, Captain, as you approached the release point," Hart says. Her tone is gentle, but there's steel under it. He doesn't want to talk about feelings. The Army manual has no appendix for that, but that's the whole reason he's sitting here. "I was aware," he says slowly, "that dropping 8,000 pounds of general-purpose bombs on that yard would almost certainly destroy more than rail cars. The yard was cheek by jowl with civilian housing. Even a tight pattern would walk off the rails and into those streets." He pauses. No one speaks. The ticking of the stove in the corner is suddenly very loud. "I thought about the order," he continues. "No deviation from bomb run. I thought about my crew, about formation discipline. I also thought about my mother reading scripture in a church in North Carolina when I was a boy, and about the chaplain telling me that maps are clean, but the world under them isn't." Hart lets that sit for a beat, then asks the question that matters. "What did you decide, Captain?" He looks up, meeting the colonel's gaze head on. "I decided," he says, "that I could accomplish the mission interdiction of German rail traffic by striking the secondary target instead of the primary. That doing so would still serve the war effort, but would likely kill fewer civilians. I decided that was the better choice, and I turned the aircraft accordingly. There, it's out. Not wrapped in legalese, not buried in passive voice." In those seconds, Hart says softly, "Did you consider aborting the run altogether?" "Yes, ma'am," he admits. The thought crossed my mind. But we were over enemy territory with our bomb bay doors open. Turning away with a live load would have meant flying longer under flak and fighters. It also would have meant entirely failing the mission. I wasn't willing to do that. "Did you consider simply following the original order and bombing the yard?" "Yes," he says again. The word tastes like metal. "I considered it. And I found that knowing what I now knew from that vantage, I couldn't square it with my duty, as I understood it both to the mission and to my own conscience." Hart steps a little closer. "Captain, were you afraid of the flak?" "No, ma'am," he says. Then after a beat, more honestly, "No more than any man is, I suppose. I've flown 32 missions. Flak is background noise you learn to live with. Were you afraid for your own life when you chose to turn?" He thinks of the shells blossoming near the wing, the plane shuddering. "I was aware," he says carefully, "that turning slightly could expose us to a different pattern of fire, but I'd rather be shot down hitting steel than live to old age knowing I dropped on those houses when I had another option. Hart nods once a small, almost imperceptible gesture. One last question, Captain, she says. If you were given the same briefing, the same view, the same 15 seconds again, would you make the same choice? There's a murmur from the back, at that a rustle of fabric, the creak of chairs. This is the spine of it, the piece everyone has been secretly asking themselves. Reeves doesn't look back. He keeps his eyes on the men who hold his fate. Yes, ma'am, he says quietly, I would. Hart's expression doesn't change much, but something in her shoulders eases just a fraction. No further questions, she says, and sits. Leonard rises. His face is composed, but there's a faint tightness around his mouth like a man who smells smoke and wants to know where the fire is. Captain, he begins, you agree that you were given a clear, specific order regarding the primary target? Yes, sir. And that order was lawful as far as you understood? Yes, sir. You are not trained in international law, correct? No, sir. You are not an intelligence officer with access to the strategic reasoning behind target selection? No, sir. You are in fact a pilot? Your job is to take the aircraft where you are told to take it, when you are told to take it, and deliver ordnance where instructed. Correct? Reeves feels the edge in the questions, but his voice stays level. Yes, sir. With the understanding that an aircraft commander in combat has to exercise judgment for the safety of his crew and the success of the mission. Leonard pounces. Ah, your judgment. So on February 16th, in those 15 seconds, you describe you set aside the judgment of your superiors based on days of intelligence work, strategic planning, and coordination across commands, and substituted your own. Yes, sir, Reeves says. Because I believed there was a way to accomplish the mission with less unnecessary loss of life. Unnecessary as defined by, you, Leonard presses. Unnecessary. As defined by what I could see with my own eyes, Sir Reeves replies. There's a flicker of heat in his voice now. Orders are written on paper. Bombs are dropped on people. I was looking at the people. A couple of pilots in the back shift in their chairs. Harriman's gaze sharpens, but he doesn't interrupt. So Leonard says if every pilot decided that his personal view from the cockpit entitled him to edit the target list, what kind of air campaign would we have, Captain? A chaotic one, Sir Reeves admits. But that's not what I'm arguing for. I'm saying that in this specific instance, with a briefed secondary target that met the mission's purpose, shifting from primary to secondary, was within my duty as aircraft commander. Leonard steps closer, voice dropping. Or perhaps, Captain, he says you were simply uncomfortable with the reality of war, with what strategic bombing actually entails. And so at the decisive moment, you flinched from the hard thing and found a more palatable way to hurt the enemy. You dressed it up as conscience. But in truth, you were soft. The word lands in the room like a slap. Something in Reeves's chest flares, anger, shame, something sharper than both. He leans forward slightly in the chair. With respect, sir, he says I've watched my own men bleed out in the radio room. I've ditched in the channel. I've flown through searchlights and fighters and flak heavy enough to make your teeth hum. I didn't turn from the hard thing. I turned because there were two hard things, and one of them killed fewer people who never held a rifle. Leonard holds his gaze for a long moment, then straightens. No further questions, he says, and returns to his table. The board confers in low voices. Reeves is dismissed from the stand and returns to his chair beside Hart. His legs feel oddly light, as if they might float him away from the floor. You did what you had to, Hart murmurs. Now we see what they do with it. In front of them, Harriman clears his throat. Court will adjourn for deliberation, he announces. Findings will be announced when reached. Captain Reeves, you will remain available on base. The gavel, an old nicked thing that used to be a table leg, comes down once. The sound echoes in the cramped room like a single distant gunshot. The quiet verdict. The hallway outside the courtroom is too narrow for the number of men in it. Pilots lean against flaking plaster boots crossed at the ankle. Gunners sit on window ledges, shoulders hunched against the February chill bleeding through the glass. A clerk squeezes past with a stack of forms, eyes wide, as if he's stumbled into the wrong kind of mission. Reeves stands at the far end near a radiator that hisses weak heat. Hart is beside him, arms folded, one foot tapping an absent pattern on the floor. From behind the closed door, low voices rise and fall, sometimes sharp, sometimes blurred, like far-off engines. "How long does deliberation usually take?" he asks. Hart snorts softly. "Anywhere from 10 minutes to 3 days, she says. Depends how much they already knew they were going to decide before we started." Down the hall, Lewis and Ortiz hover near a stairwell, talking in low tones. Harlow sits on a bench, hat in his hands, staring at the floor. Chaplain O'Malley moves among them like a ghost, with a pulse, offering half smiles, and quiet words, his eyes never straying far from the courtroom door. A siren wails faintly from the flight line, just a truck backing up near the fuel dump, but everyone's shoulders twitch the way they do when they hear a scramble bell. War seeps into everything, even this. Minutes stretch uncooperative. Someone lights a cigarette. The match flare briefly paints the corridor in orange. Smoke curls up, mingling with the dust that dances in the weak winter light. Captain Reeves. They all look up as the adjutant appears, a thin figure framed in the doorway. His expression gives away nothing. Years of passing on bad news have carved a certain neutrality into his features. "The board is ready to reconvene," he says. The room seems smaller when they go back in. The air is warmer now, fuller, as if the walls have inched closer during the recess. Men settle back into seats, with the soft thud of boots and rustle of wool. The flag behind the board has slumped a little on one side. No one has straightened it. Reeves returns to his place beside Hart. He can feel the eyes on the back of his neck, the crews, the clerks, the ground men. Not hostile, not exactly, just intent. Colonel Harriman looks more tired than he did an hour ago. His spectacles sit lower on his nose. To his left, the major leafs through a sheaf of notes. To his right, the lieutenant colonel stares at some point on the wall, expression carefully blank. "This court is now back in session," Harriman says. His voice is calm, but there's grit in it. "Captain Reeves, please stand." The act of rising feels heavier than it should. His legs obey, but there is a moment's delay, as if the air itself resists. Captain Daniel J. Reeves Harriman intones, "This court has carefully considered the evidence and testimony presented." He glances down at a typed sheet, but when he continues, his gaze lifts to meet Reeves's directly. "On specification, 1 willful disobedience of a lawful command under the 64th Article of War, this court finds you." The pause is short, but it holds an ocean. "Not guilty." The words land like a pressure drop. For an instant, the room is absolutely silent. No coughs, no shifting boots, just the faint hiss of the stove. Then from the back, a chair creaks. Someone exhales the breath they'd been holding. Harriman continues, "On specification, to conduct prejudicial to good order and military discipline under the 96th Article of War, this court finds you guilty." It's a strange sensation, relief and impact at once. Not the firing squad, not Leavenworth, but not nothing. "The court has weighed your prior service record decorations and the particulars of this case," Harriman says. "We recognize that you did not abandon your mission. You delivered ordnance on an enemy target designated as legitimate by this command. We also recognize that you acted in part from sincere motives." He doesn't say conscience. The word hangs there anyway. However, Harriman continues, "This court cannot ignore the necessity of discipline in combat operations. An aircraft commander cannot unilaterally edit his orders in the air without consequence. To allow such precedent unchecked would be to invite chaos in the air campaign." He looks down again, reading from the paper that will become part of a file in some gray cabinet. "Accordingly, this court sentences you to receive a formal reprimand, to be entered in your service record, and to be relieved of combat command. You will not fly further operational missions over enemy territory for the duration of your current posting. No prison, no stripes torn off in front of the men, but the cockpit, that slim, frostbitten world where he has spent so many hours, is closed to him." "Do you understand this sentence?" Captain Harriman asks. Yes, sir, Reeves says. His voice, to his surprise, does not crack. The sentence is subject to review by higher authority. Harriman adds almost perfunctorily, "This court is adjourned." The gavel comes down. This time it sounds less like a gunshot and more like a lid being shut. Men stand. Conversations spark in low murmurs. Some of the onlookers file out quickly as if afraid to be caught making eye contact. Others linger watching Reeves with something like curiosity or pity, or rarely something harder to name. Hart packs her papers into the worn leather folder movements, economical. "That's about as balanced as we could reasonably hope for," she says quietly. "They had to tell the system it still works, but they also didn't want to write down that flying against your conscience is the only way to be a good officer." "So I'm grounded," he says. She nods. "You'll likely be reassigned," she says. "Stateside, maybe? Training command? Flight school instructor? They'll put you somewhere your story won't walk around every hard stand on this base." He almost laughs, but the sound comes out more like a sigh. "Courts-martial aren't supposed to have politics," he says. Hart gives him a look over the rim of her glasses that says he's old enough to know better. "Everything in a war this big has politics," she replies, "including what we officially remember and what we quietly file away." As they turn to leave, men part for him in the aisle. Lewis gives a small, stiff nod. Ortiz raises 2 fingers from his side in a ghost of a salute. Harlow steps up, eyes steady. "Could have been worse," Harlow says. "Could have been better," Reeves answers. Harlow huffs a breath that might have been a laugh. "You're still breathing," he says. "That's better than a lot of our decisions turned out for some folks." Out in the corridor, O'Malley is waiting. He doesn't ask what happened. The looks on their faces are enough. So the chaplain says, falling into step beside Reeves, "They've chosen the middle road." Feels more like the side road, Reeves says. O'Malley's eyes soften. "Side roads still lead somewhere, Danny," he says. "Just not always on the maps," the colonels draw. They spill out into the cold afternoon. Over the far end of the field, another group of fortresses is assembling engines, coughing into life, propellers blurring to discs. Ground crew swarm over them, checking panels, loading bombs. Life and death goes on. He watches Carolina Sky from a distance as she's towed into position for the next mission. Harlow will sit in his seat. Some other man will feel the familiar vibration through the yoke, watch the frost creep along the glass, hear the bombardier call Bombay doors open. A jeep pulls up, driven by a clerk from Group HQ. "Captain Reeves," the young man calls. "Orders from command. You're to report to personnel in the morning. Reassignment pending." "Thank you," Reeves says. The jeep rattles away, leaving a faint smell of exhaust in the frigid air. Beside him, Hart tucks her folder under one arm. "They'll file the transcript," she says quietly. "Stamp it, initial it. Then someone will decide it's better off at the bottom of a drawer where no one has to argue about it again." Court-martial, they'd rather forget, Reeves murmurs. "But men talk," O'Malley says. "Crews talk." Maybe that's enough. Out on the field, the first engines roar to full power. The sound rolls across the base like thunder. Another mission, another city, another map, with clean lines sent off to find the dirty world underneath. Reeves stands there in the cold coat buttoned to the throat, watching the aircraft surge forward and lift away without him toward targets he will no longer see, except on briefing boards and newspaper headlines. The official record will mark this day as a reprimand and reassignment. Unofficially, in the stories traded over tin mugs and cigarette smoke, it will become something else. A tale about a captain who for 15 seconds over Germany chose steel instead of stone, and then stood up in a small, hot room to say he'd do it again. What the record forgets? The official record calls it reassignment of personnel. 2 weeks after the verdict, Captain Daniel J. Reeves steps off a transport at Randolph Field, Texas duffel, over his shoulder cap tucked under his arm. The air here smells different. No coal smoke, no wet English cold, just dust, sun, and the faint tang of aviation gasoline baked into hot concrete. An orderly from personnel meets him at the gate, salutes, takes his orders. "Welcome to the Central Instructors Group, sir," the young sergeant says. "You'll be attached to advanced bomber training." Instructor, teacher. The word sits on his tongue like something unfamiliar. He moves into a narrow room in a long, white-painted barracks. Stateside officers have painted pin-ups on the walls between the bunks. Someone has rigged a radio to play big band records late into the night. When the wind hits just right, you can smell the mess hall and the cut grass of the parade ground at the same time. Day after day, he stands at the front of a classroom full of fresh, sharp-eyed lieutenants. Chalk in hand, he draws patterns on a blackboard bomber, streams flat concentrations, proper formation spacing. Remember, he says, pointer tapping a chalk circle. Your bombardier owns the aircraft on the bomb run. Once he calls it, you hold steady. No jinking. No heroics. He hears his own words and tastes the irony. In the simulator, a crude wooden mock-up with gauges and a painted horizon line. He leans over shoulders, correcting grip on yokes, adjusting trim. Your crew has to believe you'll bring them home if it's possible, he tells one wide-eyed trainee. You're their reality. They can't see the whole picture. You can. Sometimes in the typewritten syllabi and the diagrams, he almost forgets the tight, hot courtroom in England. Almost. It creeps back at unexpected moments. In the chow line, someone mentions Kronheim as just another dot in a list of German cities hit that winter. In the officers' club, a newsreel flickers showing grainy footage of smoke rising from rail yards, the narrator's voice bright with victory. Precision bombing has brought the war machine of Germany to its knees, the announcer crows. Our brave boys in the sky have struck only at vital military targets. Only, he thinks of the tenements pressed against the yard, the church spire, the tiny dots he imagined as people. One evening, near the end of a ground school block, a cadet lingers as the others file out gathering notebooks and flight caps. Sir, the young man says, can I ask you something off the record? Reeves looks up from the stack of training reports. Go ahead, Lieutenant. The cadet hesitates, glancing at the closed classroom door, then back. Did you really refuse a target? He asks in a low voice. Over Germany. Guys talk. Some of them said you caught a court-martial for it. The question lands without surprise. Stories travel. They always do. What did they tell you? Reeves asks. That you walked your bombs onto a bridge instead of a rail yard, the cadet says. That the brass didn't like it. Both targets were on the briefing board, Reeves replies. The cadet shifts his weight. Is it true, he presses? You did it on purpose. Reeves studies him for a moment. The kid has the same look Lewis had before his first mission. Aware the war is dangerous, not yet understanding that it is also ambiguous. Yes, Reeves says, I did it on purpose. The cadet swallows. Sir, they tell us up there you just fly the plane. That the people who pick the targets have thought everything through. Most days they have, Reeves says. Most days the plan and the view through the glass line up close enough that you can live with what you're asked to do. And when they don't, Reeves could give him the safe answer, the one that fits snugly in a training manual. You're going to have about 5 seconds to decide what kind of man you want to be for the next 40 years, he says instead. If you're lucky, the right thing and the ordered thing will be the same. If they're not, you're the one who has to live with it after the shooting stops. The cadet looks at him, eyes darker now. Did you get punished, sir? Yes, Reeves says. They took away my command. Put a black mark in my file. Was it worth it? He thinks of the film of smoke blooming along the bridge of tenements left standing that his bombs could have flattened. He thinks of O'Malley's quiet eyes in the hallway of Hart's pen pausing over the word conscience. Yes, he says, it was. The cadet nods slowly, as if tucking the answer away somewhere he'll need it later. Thank you, sir, he says, and slips out into the corridor. Years pass. The war ends. Men go home some whole, some broken, in ways that don't show in discharge papers. The Army Air Forces become the United States Air Force. New airplanes fill the hangars, sleeker, faster silver wings designed for a different kind of sky. In 1952, in a records annex at Maxwell Air Force Base, a civilian historian boxes up old court-martial transcripts for storage. The file marked Reeves Daniel J. Capt. USAAF passes through her hands. She flips it open out of habit, scanning the first page. Court-martial February 1945. Deviation from bombing run, reprimand. She murmurs, tracing the lines with a finger. She notices the chaplain's testimony. The phrase lawful alternative target. The sentence, "I would make the same choice again." "Interesting," she says quietly. Not the usual. She makes a note in a small leather-bound book she keeps for future research leads. Later, other files will bury this one. Attu mutinies, desertions, theft. But the notation remains case, where pilot shifted to secondary to avoid civilian area. Decades later, in a different war, a young legal officer studying the evolution of rules of engagement will stumble on that same folder. He will read about a captain over Kronheim who chose steel over stone and was punished and spared in the same breath. He will underline a sentence in the findings. The court recognizes that the accused acted in part from sincere motives. He'll close the file and lean back, thinking about how institutions slowly learn from the quiet cases they never meant to teach from. As for Reeves, he retires a few years after the war major's leaves on his shoulders, the reprimand still tucked into his record like a piece of shrapnel that healed over, but never quite disappeared. He goes back to North Carolina, marries, raises children who know their father flew bombers, but not the details of every mission. Sometimes on still evenings, he sits on the porch with the newspaper folded beside him. Headlines talk about new conflicts, new bombs, new doctrines. Occasionally, a magazine runs a feature on ethical bombing or precision warfare. He reads them brows drawn, seeing phrases he recognizes from Hart's office, from O'Malley's sermons, from words he said in a hot little room under a buzzing bulb. One night, his eldest son home from college asks, "Dad, did you ever have to do something in the war that you regret?" Reeves looks out at the dark line of trees against the sky. "I did things I wish the world didn't need anyone to do," he says carefully. "But there's one thing I did that cost me, and I'm glad I paid it." He does not give the full story that night. It will come out in fragments over years, in questions and half-answers. Enough that long after he is gone, one of his grandchildren will type Kronheim Rail Bridge court-martial into a search bar and find buried in scanned documents and footnotes the file with his name on it. The official histories of the air war will barely mention the case, if at all. Strategists will keep their focus on tonnage dropped and factories destroyed. But in squadron bars and quiet classrooms, among men and women who have to decide what to do when the ordered thing and the right thing do not perfectly align, his story will surface like a piece of wreckage that never quite sank. They will tell it simply. There was an American pilot once who refused to bomb a city when he could still hit the enemy by striking a bridge. They tried him for it. They punished him for it. And then slowly they buried the paperwork and pretended they didn't remember. But people did remember, which is why years later, someone can still say his name out loud, and you can still stand in the cold at 21,000 feet in your mind and feel what it's like to have 15 seconds to decide which target you will live with for the rest of your life.